First tipping point tonight. Today is Columbus Day, or the day liberals and progressives like to decry as a day honoring a racist who committed genocide against the indigenous peoples of the New World. But is that historically accurate, or is this the revisionist history the left loves to shove down our throats to push their progressive agenda? Christopher Columbus discovered our country. Why not celebrate Columbus Day? There are a couple of points to be made here. First of all, the accusation that Christopher Columbus committed genocide against Native Americans is historically false. It is true that 95% of the Native American population in North America died within 2 centuries following 1492. Liberals are quick to blame mass murder as the reason why, but the truth of the matter is most of these indigenous peoples died from diseases brought to the New World by Columbus and his men, diseases to which the Native Americans had no immunities. Now, it's certainly tragic, and I know of nobody who argues that it's not tragic. But dying from a disease is not even close to falling under the definition of intentional mass genocide, which is what the left accuses of Columbus. Watch.
It's an atrocious holiday, celebrating an atrocious human being.
The debate over Columbus's legacy isn't new, but the movement to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day is gaining momentum.
Okay, there we go.
Seattle and Minneapolis led the way by dumping the holiday in 2014, while Los Angeles this year became the biggest city yet to stop honoring the explorer. Italian Americans are outraged over the effort to dump Columbus, saying the country has forgotten about the discrimination they once faced.
Columbus Day gave the immigrants something to identify with, something to be proud of at a time when they were being vilified here in America.
Joining me now, host of the Andrea Kaye radio show, Andrea Kaye, and Democratic strategist Kevin Walling. Andrea, Kevin, happy Monday.
Happy Columbus Day to you guys.
Happy 500 episodes, Liz.
Thank you. A lot of holidays to celebrate today. Kevin, let me start with you. I usually start with Andrea, but I want to go right to you on this. Christopher Columbus discovered our nation, not the founder of our government, but he discovered geographically our nation. Why not celebrate the day that he discovered this country?
Well, he discovered the Bahamas. Let's be very clear. He didn't land in the continental United States, but he was the first European explorer to hit land on this side of the world. I think it's a discussion that's worth having in terms of his mixed legacy. We all on this panel wouldn't be here probably if Columbus hadn't taken that sailing. But it's important to keep in mind the context in which he sailed and the fact that on his second voyage back to Spain, he brought back 1,500 enslaved native people with him. I think that's an important point to make out that while he was not maybe responsible in terms of the mass genocide that some folks like to talk about because it was a disease, unbeknownst to him because people didn't understand viruses and bacteria back then, but the fact that he did bring back slaves to the mainland in terms of Spain and Italy is something that we need to consider and something that needs to be taken in full context. And I think Republicans are about small government control, and if states and local municipalities opt to honor the legacy of Native people here in the United States rather than Columbus's mixed legacy, I think that's a good thing and something that we should empower local communities to do.
And listen, I agree with you. Certainly slavery is abhorrent in all its forms here. Andrea, let me turn to you. This is where I think that liberals misunderstand the historical context here, because in no way does it justify Christopher Columbus taking slaves back to Europe. It doesn't in any way, but the Native Americans also kept slaves, and it was sort of the thing to do if you came upon a cannibalistic tribe to take those people slaves. That wasn't something that was out of the realm of ordinary behavior for the time, yet that's the only reason that, besides the argument of mass genocide, which is just patently ridiculous, that's the only reason that liberals are using to discredit Christopher Columbus discovering North America, the New World.
Right, absolutely, and let's not forget that the different tribes did quite the land grab on each other as well. No, I'm glad you brought up history, and the fact of the matter is the left likes to revise history and use it at will for them to push their agenda, and that's ultimately what this is about. This is just more of the identity politics game in which, Columbus conquered the Americas, but the left is trying to conquer the United States of America through division by dividing us up and exploiting the different groups like the Indigenous people, of which I am a direct descendant, Kevin, and I kind of resent the Indigenous people being used to exploit the left's agenda, just like I dislike how they use women to push an agenda, and that's really what it's all about. And the reason why they focus on racism as an element is because the left's big game, this fits into the puzzle of taking down the Robert E. Lee statues, and now we can't have the Dukes of Hazzard on TV or sell a Confederate flag, and now Dr. Seuss is racist, because it's all part of a big picture game of trying to get America declared as invalid and illegitimate because it was founded under racism by illegitimate, evil founders. And then if they can get Americans to buy into that, then they'll see the Constitution as invalid as well. That's the game being played, and the American people saw it in 2016 and have rejected it.
And Kevin, go ahead.
That's quite a jump to make, Andrea.
Kevin, go ahead and respond to this, because I do want to stick to the history here. I mean, we can all acknowledge that Christopher Columbus did things that were immoral. He took slaves back. He did conquer some people in a way that is not what we would deem appropriate or moral in this day and age. That being said, so did the Native Americans. I think we can acknowledge the good and the bad that he did, but speaking to what Andrea is speaking of, the opposition to the celebration of the discovery of the New World by Christopher Columbus, that didn't really come into being until the 1920s. And if we look back at history, objective history here, we can see that the opposition to Christopher Columbus began actually with the KKK. They did it as a way to wage war against immigrants and against Catholics, who were two of their primary targets. And it seems to me that it has evolved, as Andrea suggests, into race baiting that began as a way to get immigrants and Catholics to be of a lesser group in our nation.
Let's be very clear, Liz. The main opposition to Columbus Day came during the 1930s against a rise with Mussolini in Italy. Benjamin Harrison first proclaimed this day that we should honor it as Discovery Day, with no mention of Christopher Columbus. So it was actually a little bit of rewriting history in terms of changing the name away from Discovery Day, which had been celebrated for 50 years in this country, to something specific towards Columbus Day, and that was a way for Italian Americans to honor their heritage. Again, I think the key thing with any of this is history is not just black and white. There are many awful things, as you rightly point out, that Columbus was guilty of. But to Andrea's point of making some larger argument that this is the left trying to take something over, Columbus Day has been something for not even less than 100 years celebrated in this country, so there isn't rewriting of history if something's only been going on for 75 years in this country. This is not some greater takeover by the left in terms of our traditions and history. What we're saying is let's acknowledge both sides of the situation here. Let's acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump in his proclamation for today makes no mention of the people that were here in this country before he landed in the Western Hemisphere.
We're almost out of time here.
Which is rewriting history.
Let me make
Donald
one final
Trump and the
point.
right are the folks that were rewriting this history, Liz.
Well, and I do think there's some revisionist history here, because we can watch this pattern. Like I said, it began in the 1920s with the KKK, who wanted to demean immigrants and Catholics. It was revived in the early 2000s by Howard Zinn's book, in which he basically looks at history through a neo-Marxist perspective. He wants to paint every historical incident as being a battle between the oppressor and the oppressed, and that is why he focused on Christopher Columbus as being the oppressor versus the Native Americans being oppressed. That isn't exactly historically accurate. It is true that Columbus came and claimed this land that was previously owned by the Native Americans, but it wasn't a matter of Christopher Columbus coming in and killing 95% of these tribes, as the left would have us believe. Disease did that. It wasn't a matter of Columbus coming in and ruining and raping and murdering. He actually executed his own men for doing that and treated the Native American tribes better than a lot of other discoverers and voyagers of that time did.
The only reason why we're having any discussion today about Columbus
on one of those slave ships back to Spain, Liz.
Kevin, the only reason why we're having this discussion today is because the left is trying to use Columbus Day and trying to use the Indigenous people as a wedge in which to divide us, to get America declared as illegitimate and racist. You can't take the politics out of the political play.
Here. We're trying to have an authentic conversation
that's exactly
about
what the left has been trying to do. They're trying to it's faux outrage. If the left cares about slavery in the past, then they will apologize to the American people and the African Americans in which they enslaved, and they will apologize for the KKK.
Listen, we have to go here. They're yelling at me in my ear, so we got to go here. But I have to say, no one's justifying the wrongdoings that Columbus and his men did, but I don't think that negates everything else good that he did, and it also doesn't give us cause to ignore the bad things that happened in the context of history or the wrongs perpetrated by the Native Americans. That's the only point here. Andrea, Kevin, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.